In our headlines on this Monday afternoon, April 3rd, here in Seoul. South Korea, the US and Japan are conducting a trilateral naval training starting today amid a host of regional geopolitical uncertainties, including North Korea's continued nuclear weapons brinkmanship. Meanwhile, Korea's southern port city of Busan is seeking to appeal to the International Bureau of Expositions amid an on-site inspection starting today for the 2030 World Expo. And the Yeouido Cherry Blossom Festival is poised to usher in crowds as capital Seoul welcomes the arrival of spring with warm weather and blooming buds this year. We start on the security front. Naval authorities from South Korea, the US and neighboring Japan are staging a trilateral training today as North Korea ramps up its nuclear weapons rhetoric. Our defense correspondent Kim Yeon-seung reports.
A three-way naval drill kicks off Monday between South Korea, the US, and Japan. The navies of three countries are set to hold an anti-submarine warfare drill on international waters south of Jeju Island. This comes just 6 months after their last drill, which also focused on anti-submarine warfare. However, this latest exercise is a preemptive measure aimed at defending against North Korea's increasingly diverse threats, which include submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Rear Admiral Christopher Sweeney of the Carrier Strike Group 11 will be overseeing the training, which will involve several warships from each country. The South Korean warships participating in the exercise include the Ulgok-2, Chaeyoung, Daejeon, and Soyang, while American warships such as the USS Nimitz, Decatur and Weinie Meyer, and the Japanese ship Umigiri will also take part.
For this trilateral exercise, we will use an unmanned underwater target. We expect to improve Seoul, Washington and Tokyo's ability to detect, track, share information and destroy through this exercise.
This three-way alliance is something that North Korea has been unhappy about, made clear when it went ahead with an intercontinental weapons test on the day of South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol leaving for Tokyo to hold a bilateral summit with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. Experts forecast further provocations to come from North Korea.
They want to send a strong message to the international community that the illicit missile and nuclear developments are justified because the United States and South Korea carry out joint military drills.
In addition to the anti-submarine warfare drill, there will be a search and rescue exercise on Tuesday, marking the first such drill in 7 years, which will strengthen cooperation in emergencies. Kim Yeon-seung, Arirang News.
On the local front, firefighters continue to combat wildfires that began over the weekend across the country, including here in Seoul amid dry conditions and high winds. Our Yeon has the latest.
The Korea Forest Service reported more than 30 forest fires across the country on Sunday amid strong spring winds and warmer temperatures causing humidity levels to drop below 20%. 15 of the fires have been extinguished, but 2 of the biggest fires, in Hongseong County, roughly 110 kilometers south of Seoul and just south of the city of Daejeon, have both been classified Level 3 emergencies, the highest fire alert. Relevant authorities have been ordered to make all-out efforts to put out the blazes, but firefighters are racing against winds that are speeding up the spread of fire.
The challenge to extinguishing the fire is the strong winds, both yesterday and today. The strong wind is causing the wildfires to spread quickly, especially faster in the valley.
Also, in central Seoul, a large forest fire broke out on the slopes of Inwangsan just before noon on Sunday, which quickly spread to the northern side of the mountain. As of Monday morning, 98% of the fire has been contained, but winds are hindering it from being extinguished completely. Authorities have banned entry to the mountain, with some 120 residents in nearby areas being evacuated, but there have been no reports of deaths or casualties. South Korea has been under a dry weather advisory for some time now, with cumulative rainfall in Seoul only reaching 67.3% of rainfall in recent years in the first 3 months of 2023. The last time it rained in Seoul was roughly the 5.6 millimeters of rain that fell in the capital on March 12, which makes it over 20 days without a drop. The United Nations Environment Program has projected that climate and land use changes would make wildfires more frequent and intense, with the number of wildfires rising by 50% by the year 2100. And South Korea is no exception. South Korea remains under a special dry weather warning, although there is some positive news with rain in the forecast early this week. Yeon, Arirang News.
And we have an update regarding the forest fire on the slopes of Inwangsan here in Seoul. According to authorities, that blaze has been brought under control. Meanwhile, it was a busy weekend for President Yoon Suk-yeol as he sought the southern part of the country to partake in a host of events aimed at engaging with locals there and pledging support for regional industries. Our senior top office correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
Throwing out the first ceremonial ball to mark the new baseball season this year, President Yoon Suk-yeol was on a weekend run to cover all major political bases in the south. Attending the Korea Baseball Organization's opening day game in the city of Daegu between the NC Dinos and the home team's Hongseong Lions, Yoon's office said the president's pitching posture sparked a buzz among the Generation Z and millennial age groups. But the ball wasn't all that he was pitching in his local brand baseball shoes. Touring the southern inland regions of the country, Yoon reached out to both conservative and liberal strongholds, meeting with locals and pledging measures to prop up the domestic economy. After showing support for local fishermen in the southern city of Tongyeong, the president made his way to the traditionally liberal Honam area, comprising Gwangju City and Jeollabuk-do and Jeollanam-do provinces. Kicking off an international garden expo, the president said he would actively support local economic growth by revitalizing domestic tourism, which suffered a decline over the years of the COVID-19 pandemic and because of the growing preference for overseas travel. It was Yoon's first trip since taking office to the Jeollanam-do province.
자연과 문화가 어우러진 순천만에 오니 따뜻한 봄의 정취가 느껴집니다. 순천이 호남과 대한민국 발전의 핵심 거점이 되도록 제대로 챙기겠습니다.
The president resumed his trip on Saturday, walking into the 100th anniversary ceremony of Seomun Market in Daegu City, a major conservative stronghold. Instead of reaching the market entrance by car as planned, Yoon stepped out of the vehicle to greet citizens with handshakes as he made his way on foot.
늘 힘이 되어주신 여러분의 손을 잡고 다시 대한민국, 새로운 국민의 나라를 만들기 위해 발이 닳도록 뛰겠습니다.
Yoon once again highlighted the government's economic growth drive to promote local consumption as well as exports. He vowed to stand by merchants and citizens and strengthen the workings of liberal democracy, market economy and the rule of law to create a fair and just system that rewards hard work and improves livelihoods. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
And the Yoon administration will seek to restore the honor of the victims of the Jeju April 3rd incident. Intentions to this end were shared by Prime Minister Han Duck-soo at a ceremony to mark the event in the Southern Island on this Monday. The Jeju April 3rd incident was a culmination of civilian protests between 1947 and 1948 against U.S. military-led rule. The protests were met with brutal government suppression and claimed an estimated 30,000 lives. Prime Minister Han offered words of condolences to families and surviving victims, underscoring the importance of freedom and human rights, which he added would ensure future prosperity. He further pledged government support to pave Jeju's path to becoming, quote, a treasure island where cultural tourism and cutting-edge IT companies meet. The season's blossoming beauties covering the country, and my colleague Shin Se-byuk is out and about here in capital Seoul to share with us some of those very scenes. Se-byuk, welcome. I see you are in Yeouido.
Good afternoon, Sunny. As you said, I am at Yeouido right now. It's such a breathtaking sight right over here with cherry blossoms in full bloom along the Yunjungno Road. As soon as you walk along the street, you quickly realize that it is a feast of the senses. Delicate pink petals do capture the essence of spring. The cherry blossoms are also in full bloom earlier than expected, so it is important to come to the festival as soon as possible to catch catch them at their peak. And this year's festival, indeed, is a particularly memorable one as it makes its comeback after a 4-year hiatus due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And for those who want to know the best spots to enjoy this stunning view, use Exit 1 of National Assembly Station or Exit 2 of Yeouido Station. And right now, as you can see behind me, many visitors are strolling along the street, and I had the opportunity to talk to some of them.
It's really nice to see the cherry blossoms because we don't have any cherry blossom or spring season in the Philippines. It's my first time here, and it's so beautiful and pretty. And I came here with my friends to take photos and pictures.
The air's great, the weather, the street, the people. They're all great. The whole road is filled with excitement. It's even more lively now that you don't have to wear a mask anymore.
Right, she's absolutely right about those face masks. Now, Sebyok, do tell us a bit more about the upcoming Cherry Blossom Festival there.
Well, the festival officially kicks off on Tuesday for 6 days from April 4th to the 9th. But as I mentioned earlier, this year's spring flowers, they bloomed some 14 days earlier than usual. So which means peak bloom also came early. In fact, according to the city government, some 735,000 people came to the festival over the weekend, forcing Seoul city government to implement traffic control measures starting April 1st last Saturday, 2 days earlier than originally planned. Another of the measures put in place is increasing the number of subway trains during the first and second weekends of April to ensure a smooth flow of traffic and avoid any inconvenience for visitors.
Right, Sebyok, accordingly, I suppose taking public transportation would be smart. And before you leave us, do you share with us some final tips to ensure a pleasant outing at Yeouido?
Yes, well, there is a rain in the forecast starting tomorrow, which means you want to come here as soon as possible to check out the beautiful spring blossoms before they fall. Because if you miss this chance, you will have to wait for the whole year. Now, back to you, Sunny.
All right, Sebyok, thank you very much for that coverage. That was our Shin Sebyok reporting live from the streets of Yeouido. Now, in other news, a delegation representing the International Bureau of Expositions is here in Korea to assess Busan's bid to host the 2030 World Expo. Our Lee has more.
The Bureau International des Expositions, or BIE, which is the intergovernmental organization in charge of overseeing and regulating World Expos, arrived in South Korea on Sunday to inspect the country's port city of Busan, which is looking to host the World Expo 2030. The inspection team will stay in Busan for 6 days and 5 nights and will evaluate the hosting capacity and preparations done by the city. During their stay, the team will also meet with President Yoon, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, as well as other ministers. The city of Busan, meanwhile, is hoping to show the inspection team that is fully capable of hosting a major event like the World Expo, while also differentiating itself from other candidates. Busan faces competition from Rome, Odessa, and Riyadh. With a tight race amongst the finalist cities expected, the inspection is all the more important as the report will be made available to the 171 member countries of the BIE, which will then review it before voting for a winner at the November general meeting. Watchers say the Ukrainian city of Odessa's hosting of the World Expo 2030 would be symbolic considering the current geopolitical crisis, while others say that Riyadh is leading this four-way race. However, South Korea remains hopeful as sources say that the inspection team was disappointed over the lack of preparation and proper infrastructure in place during its recent visit to Riyadh. Lee, Arirang News.
OPEC members and their allies, including Russia, have announced an abrupt cut in oil production starting next month, unsettling markets that had expected no change in output for the time being. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji has details.
Members of the OPEC Plus, made up of major oil producers and Russia, have announced their price cuts of around 1.16 million barrels per day. Saudi Arabia state media said Sunday that the country will be cutting its oil output by 500,000 barrels per day, starting next month, until the end of this year. The Saudi Energy Ministry described the move as a precautionary measure, aimed at supporting the stability of the oil market. It also explained this is in addition to a reduction announced by the OPEC Plus nations last October, when they agreed to an output cut of 2 million barrels per day that angered the Biden administration. To deal with soaring oil prices following the war in Ukraine, the U.S. has been arguing that the world needs lower oil prices to support economic growth and prevent Russian President Vladimir Putin from earning more revenue to fund the war. Iraq also announced it'll cut oil production by 211,000 barrels per day starting May. The UAE, Kuwait, Algeria, and Oman will also be making cuts in oil production. The Russian government also says Sunday local time that Moscow would extend a voluntary cut of 500,000 barrels per day until the end of 2023. Analysts say the latest move from the oil producers is expected to push up oil prices, which are currently at about $80 a barrel. The head of investment firm Pickering Energy Partners told Reuters that prices could jump by $10 per barrel. 배은지, Arirang News.
And back on the local front, food delivery apps are witnessing a dramatic decline in users amid a host of factors, including higher service expenses. Our trade correspondent Shin Ha-young explains.
The growth of delivery app companies in South Korea stopped as people returned to normal life and dining out more frequently. On top of that, consumers have been abandoning delivery apps due to soaring delivery fees amid high inflation.
I used to order through a delivery app during the COVID-19 pandemic, but these days everything's gotten so expensive, including delivery fees, that I found myself cooking at home more often instead.
When ordering delivery food, I would spend less than $15 or under in the past. But now, as I have to spend more than that, I tend to take food out or only use the app when I'm with others.
In fact, according to Mobile Index, a big data analysis company, the three major delivery apps in South Korea posted an on-year decrease of nearly 20% in monthly active users in February. That's about 6.6 million fewer users compared to the previous year. The number dropped below the 30 million level for the first time in 2 years after reaching a peak of 36.8 million in December 2021.
With more consumers burdened by delivery costs, some restaurants have been offering discounts to reduce delivery fees.
You can easily see posters in front of restaurants that say customers can order food at cheaper prices if they visit and take their food out without ordering via a delivery app. This also comes as platform commission fees have become a burden for restaurant owners as delivery costs soar. In response, delivery app companies have come up with measures to cut delivery fees, such as through bundled deliveries where they deliver to multiple locations in one journey. It's a huge change compared to the past when companies competed in the market for single-item deliveries. Meanwhile, one expert forecasts the drop in users will continue for a while.
Young members of the MZ generation who want convenience are the ones who order delivery food the most. Under a new bundle delivery service, which takes longer to get the meal, more people will take food out, leading to a further decrease in the number of app users.
She added that delivery app firm sales had grown fivefold over 3 years, but it will be tough to increase or even maintain those sales as consumer lifestyles shifted offline. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Russia, a bombing at a café has killed a prominent military blogger and wounded over 2,000 people. The blast took place in Russia's second largest city of St. Petersburg on Sunday local time. According to officials, military blogger Vladimir Tatarsky was killed while leading a discussion at the café, which is organized by pro-war group Cyberfront Z. It's believed that an explosive device was hidden in a small statue that was gifted to him by a woman attending the event. Russian authorities have said that they are treating the case as a suspected murder, and the group has called it a terrorist attack. Tatarsky gained popularity after Russia invaded Ukraine, providing commentary and analysis on the war to his more than 500,000 Telegram followers. Meanwhile, in the United States, at least 32 people have been killed after a series of tornadoes tore through cities and towns in the country's south and Midwest over the weekend. The fatalities occurred in the states of Arkansas, Tennessee, Illinois, Indiana, Alabama, and Mississippi. The death toll comes after a storm system battered the affected regions on Friday local time. with Missouri and Wisconsin also affected. According to the U.S. National Weather Service, at least 80 tornadoes have been recorded since Friday. Governors of Indiana, Iowa, Illinois, and Arkansas have announced emergency or disaster declarations in order to gain immediate access to assistance. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden on Sunday issued a major disaster declaration for Arkansas, freeing up federal resources for the state. In other news, Oscar-winning Japanese composer Ryuichi Sakamoto has died at the age of 71. According to Sakamoto's agency, he died on Tuesday following a battle with cancer. Sakamoto won an Oscar, a Golden Globe, and a Grammy for his 1987 movie composition work on The Last Emperor, in which he also had an acting role. He also starred alongside the late David Bowie in the 1983 film Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, for which he wrote the music theme. Sakamoto was born in Tokyo in 1952, and in 1978 he co-founded Yellow Magic Orchestra, an influential electronic act. Despite his passing, it is not the last we have heard from Sakamoto, as an album by the composer, titled Travasia, is said to be released on May 5th. And finally, an artist unveiled a baby replica of the iconic Eiffel Tower over the weekend in the French capital of Paris. It's called the Eiffella and was revealed to the public on Saturday local time after being set up overnight. Located in Paris's Champs-de-Mars Park, opposite the real Eiffel Tower, the 32-meter structure can appear to match its 330-meter tall counterpart in size when viewed from a certain angle. In keeping with the baby concept, the replica emits the sound of a crying baby every 10 minutes, which is then followed by a lullaby. Weighing over 20 tons, the iron replica took a year to make and is made up of 3,900 large pieces and 9,000 smaller pieces. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Much of Korea is on very high alert against wildfires. Over the weekend, 30 wildfires were reported in the western parts of the country, which are very rare to happen around this time of year. Usually, East Coast areas have more reports of wildfire. And today is warmer and drier in the west, so please be extra careful with anything that could cause a blaze. Let's not sacrifice your or your family's safety and livelihood by being careless with fire. Meanwhile, conditions are as pleasant as yesterday and warmer in Seoul this afternoon. That much hoped for rain tomorrow will bring relief from that ongoing heat. Now, eastern parts of Korea are having highs in the upper teens to low 20s this afternoon under sunny skies with decent air quality nationwide. So it is another fine day to spend some time outdoors. In fact, today could be the last day to enjoy the beautiful spring blossoms. 3 days of rain looks like bringing much relief from the dry air into the country, but also temperatures will drop dramatically. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That ends our Monday afternoon newscast. We have our panel session on the cost of living coming up next, so do stay with us. Thank you for now.
I'm live.
저를 도와주시는 분들이
저희와 함께 해주시는 세션분들
아무리 봐도 없지. 텐션 같은데 아니라고 아무도 안 하는 거고.
좋아요.
Dear world citizens, see you in Busan in 2030. Busan is the most beautiful city, rich in culture, rich in all the best technologies, and rich in historical heritages around Busan, connected by all means of transport, including air, train, roads, and marine transportation. Don't miss the best opportunity, which will work as a permanent reminder on your mind that you really will have enjoyed the best memories in your life.
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
Contour the world, simply contour. India, the United Kingdom, New Zealand. Woo!
I'm excited. You excited?
Of course.
Yeah.
Music, start.
The government says additional hikes in utility bills are inevitable given the significant operating losses incurred by the Korea Electric Power Corporation and the Korea Gas Corporation. So how high are the losses by these two entities? What are the broader implications of higher utility bills? And how is the Korean economy weathering the current global slowdown?
Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we address the rising cost of living here in Korea as authorities look to further raise utility bills in the near future. For more, I have Professor Hongseong at Korea University live on the line. Professor Song, it's been a while and it's great to speak with you again.
Yeah, good afternoon to you and thank you for inviting me.
I also have Professor Shim Myung-gyu at Yonsei University live on the line as well. Professor Shim, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Professor Song, let's begin with your thoughts regarding the government's plan to delay its decision on utility bill hikes. What are your thoughts regarding this particular delay?
Yeah, I think the current delay is largely from the political reason, but however, economically, I think still it makes sense because of the shrinking economy and Korean economy is now seems to enter the recess phase. So that to that regard, it's better to bear the burden of the recess burden by the government is much reliable and for the protection of the economy.
Right. Professor Shim, regardless of this particular delay, though, the government has said a hefty hike in utility bills is inevitable going forward, given the significant losses incurred by the Korea Electric Power Corporation and the Korea Gas Corporation. What more can you tell us about their losses?
As most of us would agree, the low price in electricity and gases kept by the government for a long time seems to be the main source of the huge loss that we have seen. Then the question would be how we can resolve such an issue. I think there are two ways. First, raise the price immediately. Second, issue the government bond to fill in the loss instead of rising price right now, because it may not be a good time to raise the bill. I would say that the latter policy is just a shift of the burden from the current generation to the future generation, so it cannot resolve the fundamental issue. So while the hike in the utility bills poses another challenges on the inflation rate, I think that it is inevitable at this point because such a huge loss by KEPCO cannot be permanently allowed.
Right, I see. Professor Song, in the first quarter this year, Korea raised electricity prices by 9.5%, which was the highest hike in 40 years. Do you expect a similar surge this time around?
Yeah, when I look back at some history of the electricity price change is from the 2011 and 2012 and 2013, we have seen that 9.6%, 4.9% and 9.6% increase. And from the 2014 to the last, before the last year in the 2021, the electricity bill remains very constant over time. And last year we have witnessed, as you mentioned, a very hefty hike of the electricity bill. So this year, as I told you earlier, that government decision to stay where it is now is, I think it's better. But the problem is I look into details of the coal gas and the KEPCO, why they have had such a large level of debt. And but on the other hand, still their interest rate imposed on the bond issued by the KEPCO and coal gas still maintains a relatively very cheap, low interest rate. So that is a kind of inconsistency, why that is, according to the report, is very dangerous level. However, in the corporate bond market, still regarded as the safest one next to government-issued bond. So when I look into some cash flow financial statements, of the both companies, I look some very important perspective should be which gather the attention.
Right. Hopefully that will be looked into as well then. Professor Shim, against that backdrop, what do you suppose would be the broader implications of a higher surge in electricity as well as gas prices in the future?
Given that the weights on items such as electricity and gas prices when measuring the CPI is not negligible, surge in such items would pose another challenge, as I said, to lower the inflation rate. For instance, the inflation rate of electricity and the related items was already 12% in the last year, which is much higher than the overall inflation rate of 5%. So allowing higher utility bills would have much larger impacts on the inflation rate this year without any ambiguity. So it will be inevitable to avoid the additional shock that would raise the inflation rate this year.
Right, I see. Professor Song, findings for February show that industrial output, retail sales and facility investment all rose while chip production itself plunged. What are your prospects on Korea's economic health in the near future?
In the near future, I have a very pessimistic, non-promising at all. But the main reason is because of the confrontation between U.S. and China is increased, and also then the current government of South Korea has emphasized some security issues over the economic issues. So economic issues are addressed under the guise of the national security, and as long as our government emphasized some kind of the alliance with the U.S. and other Japan, then it could be exacerbated. Particularly, Professor Shim has mentioned the impact on the CPI. When I look back in 2014 and 2019, KDI and the KIEP, they have announced the electricity bill increase impact relatively weaker from the 0.032 percentage point and just 0.15 for percentage point. But recently I have seen some report in last year, in 2022, December, I have seen that the impact would be much larger, which is 0.32%, which is just 10 times bigger than the previous measure, the impact on the CPI. So as long as the government would like to maintain the policy against lowering the CPI for the time being, I think the better way to keep the inflation, to keep the electricity bill as it used to be. But however, as I mentioned earlier, the interest rate borne by the KOGAS and the KEPCO is much lower. And another aspect is from the operation, when I look into the cash flow statement, which was announced by KOGAS and KEPCO, both they have positive cash flow and relatively stable and non-negative cash flow from the operation, which means when they sell the electricity and they're from the main operation, the cash flow is not as bad as anticipated. However, the negative and the increasing debt level is caused by some cash flow, the investment activities. So what kind of investment activities have been conducted during the past several years? I do not look into details, but I quite wonder, and I'm concerned about, this could be related with the issues of the transformation of the electricity industries, the way how they produce and generate electricity power. So it is up to recently we have seen that the natural gas has transformed and it has been greatly increased because of the weather and the climate crisis around the world. And that is maybe the equipments and the machines and some kind of new factories that has been established under the for example, capital expenditure has been maybe dramatically increased for both of the firms, KOGAS and KEPCO. If that would be the case, the focus should lie on not on the electricity bill, but on the what kind of investment activities are involved. As long as investment activities are related with some long-term issues, such as long-term operation, then it's better for those both firms rely more on the financing from the issue through the issuance of the bonds. To that regard, in the last year, December 2020, the National Assembly has approved the increment of the bond issuance against equity value and their own cash accumulated balance. So I think we think we need to wait and see whether how those increased limit of the bond issuance played out on the upcoming years. As long as we are in the phase of on the verge of the recess, I think that would be the much better way to avoid that.
All right, I see. And moving forward then, Professor Shim, Korea's exports themselves, they've been losing significant ground in recent months. And that being said, what do you suggest to address this particular challenge on the export front?
So while the topic is different, I'm in line with Professor Song's view that I'm rather pessimistic about the current situation surrounding Korea. I'm not sure if there are that many good policies that the government can impose to resolve the issue, because the trade deficit seems to be mainly driven by factors that are beyond the control of Korean firms and the government. First, the tightened monetary policy in the U.S. and other advanced economies made it difficult to export due to low demand overall. And also, this trend seems to continue this year again because the war, the Russia-Ukraine war, seems to be has the persistent effect on the global economy. And the global economy is expected to decline due to the lagged effect of the tightened monetary policy in the last year, and also barriers to export increase, such as the IRA Act. Maybe the usual and classical suggestion would apply. The firm needs to put more efforts to advance technologies to compete with the foreign companies, and the government should aid the firms that try to advance themselves.
Right, and adding on to what Professor Shim has just said, Professor Song, the government here is also seeking to ease the fallout from the failing exports by providing members of the public with discount coupons and tax incentives to boost domestic consumption, that is. How do these measures, Professor Song, look to affect the country's current inflation?
Yeah, actually, these tax subsidy or other help from the government would be to revive the domestic economies, the domestic part. Particularly in the last year, we have this year, January, we have witnessed that for the first time the balance of payment has fallen into a negative range. So because of the negative net exports, so that is really serious effect on the current account of the Korean economy. So as long as our dependence on the trade against the GDP level is huge, and almost 80%, 90%, that is shrinking because of the decreased export and decreased import, which implies that our Korean economy's product is shrinking actually. So to that regard, what I'm most concerned about is we rely too much on some kind of some chip producers such as Samsung and SK, and in the battery field, we have three major LG Energy Solution and some SK ON, and those companies they suffer. They are particularly they are subject to the ILA effect. there is a very negative effect on the ILA because the ILA just 3 days ago, the details of the ILA implementation is introduced. Currently, the direct impose of a subsidy of the $7,500 that has been given out to the Korean companies until to 2025. The problem is, as long as the Korean manufacturers in the U.S. and in Korea, as long as they accept the government subsidy from U.S. government, they have disclosed every information about the technology, and as long as they have earned too much, that they have reported pay back some additional amount of profit to the U.S. government. So this is a kind of a nationalized. Some people say that this is actually nationalized Korean company in the U.S. So in order to overcome and minimize the negative effect of this one, we have to board on some recovery of the economic growth in China. To that regard, I strongly urge the current government should pose to remain some balanced diplomacy, and also that is for the purpose of economic improvement and also for the purpose of security, national security. That could be much better preserved under the balanced position.
Right, and to place priority perhaps on Korean companies then. Professor Shim, the Bank of Korea is poised to share the fate of its benchmark interest rate this month. What is your outlook?
My expectation on the interest rate would be somewhat not that different from other forecasters or economists because of the risk in the banking sector in the US and possibly in Korea due to the spillover effect. It will not be that easy to raise the interest rate at this point. In addition, while the inflation rate is still high, it has become 4.8% in February, which is 1.5% percentage point lower than the peak in last July. Given that the Fed had raised the rate only by 0.25% last month, I guess there is a room for the BOK not to raise the interest rate this month. However, this does not imply that the interest rate interest rate hike should be stopped. Inflation rate is still high, much higher than the target rate of 2% set by the BOK. So if the turbulence in the financial market becomes tranquil, I believe that the BOK would raise the interest rate again.
Right, and that being said then, Professor Song, how would another hike by the BOK look to affect Korea's housing market?
If you ask my personal opinion, then I definitely object to the hike of interest rate because the decoupling between the Korea and the U.S. has been already very sustained quite a meaningful period, and also the economic situation is quite different between U.S. and Korea because U.S. has established some kind of fence and protect their economy and actually coerce and force the allied countries to send their companies and build manufacturing companies in the U.S. But however, and in return, they provide some security protection. That's because they dare to demand and request some payment for themselves. So to that regard, the U.S. economy is they could concentrate on some inflation issue as long as that implies that the U.S. economy recovery is relatively very robust and the job market is good. But however, in Korea is thoroughly different. We are already in the almost a phase in the excess and the divergence between some top level wealthy people and the lower people and the middle people. Actually, I think the Korean middle income family is almost wiped out currently because of the hiked interest rate and also it's very difficult. They lose jobs opportunities. So that is my main concern lies in that the next BOK open market committee, they should just retain what the current interest right now, or preferred lower interest rate preferred, definitely.
Right, I'm sure many would agree with you right there. Professor Shim, this next topic was something that both you and Professor Song mentioned earlier, but what's the latest regarding the Biden administration's guidelines on EV tax credits under its Inflation Reduction Act?
First of all, it seems that the guidelines on EV tax credit that was provided last week have reflected the stance of Korea and less partially. In particular, EV should satisfy the following 3 criteria to receive subsidy. First, it should be produced in the US. Second, more than 50% of the components of battery should be produced or assembled in the US. Third, more than 30% of an applicable critical mineral should be extracted or processed in the US or in the countries in which the US has an FTA. So auto and battery industries in Korea do not need to change the process right now, which relieves the initial concerns that the IRA Act would have significant negative effects on South Korea. However, critical minerals should not be procured from foreign entity of concerns to receive the subsidy from 2025. So the immediate task for the battery industry would be to diversify the portfolio other than China, which would be classified as the foreign entity of concerns with very high likelihood.
Right, foreign countries of concern as dictated by, of course, the US. Meanwhile, back on the cost of living, Professor Song, here in Korea, how should members of the public perhaps seek to better weather the hikes or the potential hikes in overall prices?
Yeah, it's like some jumping around these several issues. As Professor Sim mentioned, some ILA problem, I agree with his opinion, but it could have a negative impact on the Korean companies. In addition to that, I have mentioned that some critical issues are hidden by some implementation of this ILA is really the companies are more subject to the U.S. government national policy, and also security issues are always totally determined by the ad hoc approach, by attitude of the U.S. government. Whether they determine this is related with the security issue, they can impose whatever they want. So that is a really vulnerable situation for the companies. So. As Professor Shi mentioned, the portfolio are diversified exporting. So it is very good, and I truly agree with that. But in order to achieve that, what we are required and needed is we must maintain some balanced position in the international diplomatic order. Otherwise, it's just a vacant voice. So. And also about the CPI case, I think as long as we are in the recess, the CPI should not be our main concern, right. Even though still it is important, maybe. But however, I would rather suggest the Korean government to control the price gouging, particularly.
Right, I see.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Right, hopefully they are listening to you then, Professor Song. As always, thank you so much, Professor, for your insights. And Professor Shim, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Right, well, that ends Monday's edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. Do join us again same time tomorrow. That would be Tuesday.